So Dee's going to be up first, and Dee Brooks is an agitator, blender and chief hugger of the Jeder Institute Australia. She's a passionate community development grassroots practitioner, facilitator and trainer with 20 years of experience in community, organisational and government settings. Dee is an international nomad who has travelled and worked in over 20 countries, and her background is in youth work, community-based research and university outreach. So thank you, Dee.
Thanks, everyone. ABCD is like part of my DNA, just to add, a few more acronyms in there. And it's something that when I was in youth work many years ago, working with the strengths of young people and looking at how we could kind of lift those, that I was first introduced to ABCD. And it was just a light bulb moment. And I thought, it's not rocket science, but what it gave me was a framework around the way I already worked. So then it gave me a whole lot of other tools and strategies. So I really like to kind of emphasise that and Kate will know the same, that ABCD is not difficult. It's as easy as ABCD. So asset-based community development is the actual title. Asset-based community-driven or asset-based citizen-led development you might also see in different literature. And it started in the 80s, or started in the 60s even, with John McKnight and Jody Kretzmann, and they created the ABCD Institute, which is in Chicago at DePaul University. So I'm an international faculty member there as well, so I get to hear different stories from all around the world, and especially with my nomadic life at the moment. So this photo always reminds me of, this was a community I brought my children up in, and it is an hour west of Newcastle, out past the vineyards, and it's a small village, about 12 streets, but a lot of farms and things, out in the distance as well. So this is Christmas at the pub. And at this particular, it's Christmas Eve. At Christmas Eve, everyone comes together for a hayride for the kids. So everyone brings their kids up. There's all the utes and flatbed trucks there, all with big hay bales on the back. All the kids get put on the utes. The parents go into the pub and they follow Santa around in a horse and carriage around to all the streets and give, the older people fruitcake and lollies to kids who couldn't come down, that kind of thing. Don't even ask me about WHS. I don't think that's even ever mentioned. All these kids on the back of the utes. But it's something that the community does. They all come together and they put this on. I haven't done work in that community, so they don't know what I do. So it's not about me. This is something that happens every year, and it's been going for over 30 years. There was one year, there was a new publican who said, I'm not doing that, forget it. So what happened? The utes turned up, Santa turned up, the horse and carriage turned up, someone brought a barbecue up out the front, the band, who was also part of the bar staff, just started playing anyway, and it happened anyhow. Because the citizens or the community members came forward and said, no, this is our community, this is what we do. So that's always my reminder, the communities are doing this stuff anyway. They're doing it. So as a mate of ours, Peter Kenyon, says, people support what they help to create and they want to make it happen. So if they're part of that creation, then they've got a vested interest, right? Then they want it to be there. And this is a wall in Singapore where I did some work, and they have this for community members, a request of something you might need and an offer for something you can give. And so people will put up little notes. I couldn't take a photo of those notes because of people's names, but it's a wall that they have there permanently. So in ABCD, there's 6 assets that you can connect to in community. And I haven't got a picture of them, but I can add it actually. So there's 6 assets to connect to, because assets has quite a different term, meaning in different sectors. So the first asset to connect to is the skills and abilities, talents and passions of individuals. So that is an asset to be tapped into. So you've got those skills, talents and abilities. You've got the government and non-government people or associations you can tap into. You've got the networks, like informal networks, who are already there. It could be, the Breastfeeding Mothers Association or the soccer clubs or, anything like that. You've also got the economic assets, and economic assets is really about where is the dollar in people's pocket being spent. Is it leaving the community or is it staying? You know, you can map where the dollars, where the economy is moving. Then you've also got the physical assets, and physical assets in two ways: built environment and natural. So you can map those as well. So they're all mappable. So the built environment might be, as an example, you know, a school with, might be like a gated community, but they've got sporting arenas, they've got commercial kitchens, all these things that you can possibly tap into. And then, of course, the physical environment of beaches, walkways, walk paths, all of that kind of stuff. And then the sixth asset is culture, history, values, local community values. So like when I worked in Gundagai, who knows what something really prominent at Gundagai? The dog on the tackle box, right? That's part of their culture and their history. So when I was working in Tamworth and we looked at that asset to map it, it was highly around country music and equestrian events. So each community is unique, and when we map these, we map in 4 different levels. So we'd map it at an individual level of what are the skills and abilities of different people. We map it around the community, so what are all those, like I said, the NGOs and non-profits, the social service agencies, all of that kind of thing. The organisational mapping, so what is it that, if you're with an organisation, what are the assets that you have within the organisation that can support what community's doing? So rather than going out there like a Band-Aid approach or a deficit approach that says, you know, this is what you need, it's actually saying this is what we have to offer to strengthen what you're already doing. So you can map that internally as well. And then the stakeholder, so how do you get a different crowd of people around the table around an issue? And there's a really simple mapping for the stakeholder that I use. I haven't got up here, but I can leave it with Jax. And it's called the Top 100 Partners. It comes from the Tamarack Institute in Canada. And it's quadrants, but it's the 4th quadrant is the most important, about lived experience. So if, for example, you're working in community around the issue of inclusion, what does inclusion look like for our community, and you want to invite those different voices in, then you look at these different sectors, and the lived experience is the powerful bit. You know, get the lived experience. So get the people who have disabilities or are having issues in the community to come in and talk to the banking sector and the fish and chip shop guy and the Samaritans, and get them together having that discussion. So we map in these different levels for different reasons, but it's still not cookie cutter. You know, it's not like I would go into a community and say, right, now we've done this, tick, now let's do this. It's actually really about flow. So what I've discovered, particularly over the last 3 years of being nomadic, is I became one of those experts who went into a community, set things up and did some work with them and left. And so I had to really rethink what I was doing. How can that be community-led? How can my work still be community-led if that's what I'm doing? So what we started designing with a team from Jeder, what we started designing was a blend of ABCD and participatory approaches, and things that, like I said, are not rocket science. They're easily teachable, transferable skills. So then when I left, people could teach others, and then they could teach others. And it just kept going. It's absolutely snowballed. I just found out yesterday that it's called the Toughen Up Challenge up in Inverell, further up away from Sydney. And the Toughen Up Challenge started about 4 years ago in one open space session with about 6 people there having a discussion about what would it look like for people with a disability in community, hosting and supporting and running like a mini Olympics, that kind of thing. And it started with 6 people there, taught them the skills, gave them that knowledge and wisdom. And I just found out yesterday that they've gone from the first year they had something like 20 teams of different people, younger people, and then adult teams as well. And they're now up to 180 teams 4 years later, and it's huge, absolutely huge. So by spreading that kind of knowledge and wisdom, it can go anywhere. So this is a big thing about ABCD, is that it's not about deliverables. It can be really hard to measure. It can be really difficult to measure. And then there's also things like, does it have to be measured? Like, how do you measure the connection of friendships made through, an activity? But does it matter also? So is there a way that you can maybe measure the social cohesion? Yes. But it's not what we're looking at. We're looking at discoverables. So how can we turn people's gifts into actions? So we want to be able to create a container where people can feel safe to step up and say, yeah, I can give this a go, I can do this. So we do a lot of co-facilitation or co-hosting and shadow facilitation, which I'll tell you a bit more about in a second. This is a framework from ABCD that we use, and it's as simple as this. So when I've worked with a group that we've talked about, what's everyone's skills and abilities in the room? What are things that you're passionate about, that you love, that you're interested in? And we would put up on the board, across this way, know, teach, learn. And then say, everyone grab a pen, come up here, and next to all these skills that you've talked about, compile a list there of cooking, singing, grassroots organisation, whatever it might be, all the skills and abilities there, and now put your name in the grid about the ones you know, the ones you're willing to teach, and the ones you want to learn. And it creates these instant groups. It's just fantastic. Within 2 minutes, the room just goes off buzzing. Because you might have someone who's got here, I can teach Bahasa, for example. And then you've got 8 people who say, I want to learn that. So you've got this instant match. It's such a simple, powerful tool. Really easy.
Is it translatable to like an online community rather than a room?
Yes, we're actually just developing one for our organisation. Yeah, for exactly that, because we've got a lot of our members, there's about 40 of us. A lot of them are in the NDIS space, and the rest of us are in the community building space, and of course those two combine, but we don't often talk to each other. So, and we're quite often isolated. We're in different parts all over Australia. So we're just looking at that. How can we develop something online? Yeah, definitely. So 10 years ago, I discovered this. So I had been applying ABCD and looking at, what else could it look like if people learn these skills and transfer them to others or teach others. So you might find it called the art of hosting, which sounds like a Tupperware party, or participatory leadership is another term. That was actually coined when a group of art of hosting practitioners were asked to go and do some work with the European Commission. And a few people said, we can't go in there and say we're going to, art of hosting. Yeah. So participatory leadership was born. But there's a whole lot of practices within that and more. There's a whole lot of stuff and new things coming in all the time that the global community are finding works. So I'm going to show you how I when I go into a community, what I do, how I enter that community. So it's through teaching the different methodologies or the different ways of working, like I've just told you about, maybe a bit more in depth. But we use these underpinning frameworks. So learning conversations is an ABCD framework. Theory U is a whole methodology of its own that we use in a design way. I'll show you in a sec. And then, like Jax was showing there, this divergent, emergent, convergent thinking, or the breath pattern, as art of hosting call it. So when I am asked to help design or train community members in a program, project, could be a conference, an informal gathering, whatever it might be, First thing I do is ask them to tell me the story. Why do you want to do this? And so then in hearing their story, it gives me a bit of a better idea of which underpinning framework should we start with. And this is just through experience, and it has changed a couple of times as well. So learning conversations are great for when there's an elephant in the room. You know, people really need to talk about what's going wrong and what's not working for them. And it uses a reframing mechanism, like appreciative inquiry, if anyone knows of that methodology. So what it does is it gives people that space to be heard, and then it reframes it and says, and what's your preferred future vision? What would you rather it look like? And what don't you want to happen? And then we look at, and what are the gifts and skills that you have to offer? So instead of then people having a final report or, you know, a final paper that says, this is how we've reframed it and this is what we want, here, you guys go and do it, it's actually the third part of it is saying, no, what are the gifts and abilities and skills that you have to offer this? And so then people put their names forward and have a bit more buy-in. Do people know Theory U? Yeah. A few people, yeah. So Theory U has 3 kind of sweeps that we use. We run 3-day unconferences based on open space, and it's like a Seinfeld episode of conferences. It's a conference about nothing, and people turn up. It's great, and then they talk for 3 days about stuff. Like, it's fabulous. So we use Theory U as the underpinning for the 3 days. So sweep 1, or day 1, is kind of the downloading. Let's talk about everything that you think you already know about. Let's have those big discussions and get those out. The next sweep is the reflection. So day 2 is about going for a dialogue walk, or having some meditation time, or really having some time out to just kind of go over yesterday's thoughts, but also let them go. You know, let day 1 go and sit in that reflection space. And then the third sweep is like prototyping. It's engage, let's go. And Otto Sharma talks about act in an instant. So he says when you come up this prototyping side and you come to here where you're kind of crystallizing things, don't say, hey, that's a great idea, I'll take that to the board meeting next month. And Otto would say, no, act in an instant. What can you do right now? So find that. Some people would call like the low-hanging fruits, you know. What is it that you can actually enact right now? And then the divergent, convergent, emergent. So I just used this framework for a community in South Africa, and it was for an ABCD conference, but it was like, it was for practitioners and community members. So we had 180 people from 23 different countries there. And so in the designing beforehand, we went through this. So we've got all the ABCD tools, but we diverged. Diversion had those big conversations. I find this one great for innovation. The groan zone is just what it sounds like. I've been in rooms where you can almost taste it. Well, you know, where people are so frustrated and they're groaning and they're like, I can't do this anymore. And I go, aha, we're there. I find this is one of those patterns, once you see it, you can't unsee it. And then the convergence is, okay, we're going towards an action plan or next 5 steps or whatever it might be. So the fourfold practice is one of the art of hosting practices, and it is just really quickly about hosting self. You host yourself. So I'm needing to host myself here in front of all you and not swear. So I'm hosting self, right? So then be hosted. You need to be hosts. You're sitting there being hosted at the moment. Hosting others. Jax is hosting others here tonight. So this is like, how do you show up when you're being hosted? How do you show up when you're hosting others? Are you sitting there with your arms folded going, come on, Dee, you reckon you can tell me stuff? Come on, prove it. You know, or are you open and curious? And then being a part of a community hosting itself. So that's another pattern. So I would teach that in community alongside all the ABCD tools that then we start to layer. That's appreciative inquiry. I won't get stuck on that one. We use World Café. So these are just some of the ones we use. Open space. Do people know open space technology? It's a fabulous way to open up to hear what people's passion is in the room. You start off with a blank agenda. There's nothing there. And you get people to self-organise around their passion and their interest. So there's a whole lot of methodology behind that. Then Theory U, as I said, we've already talked about that one, and the groan zone. This looks difficult. I find it really useful. And I've worked with local governments and I've said to them, if any of these words are just you're balking at, you're like, I can't handle these words like art of hosting or anything like that, don't use it. Use what words work for you. So it's called the 8 breaths. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then 8 is the big one. So this is about calling a team together. So we could do this in community around a particular project or idea, clarifying that, inviting others in, and all of these are a breath of their own. So you're still diverging, getting to that groan zone or the innovation space, and then converging. Then you have the actual meat or whatever the project is you might do. Harvesting is really about feedback. It's about, and I start harvesting here. What is it that we want to harvest so we can plan our design as well? And then we've got the acting, what are the next 5 steps? And then reflecting, what worked well, ends in results and relationships, and you can go back into here. What's the next question or possibility? I've done this framework in 1 day, and I've also used it for an 18-month project. So the breaths can just, keep flowing, keep moving. And this is just a template for designing for wiser action. So this is done by community members. You did one, didn't you, Jax? Yeah. So this is, now let's map it out. The what, the how, the when, the core partners, the stakeholders, unanswered questions. What else we got there? The purpose, the challenges, what you need help with, who's your core team, what's your next steps, what's your vision. I won't keep on that one. I'm watching the timer. It's good having a timer. So that's just another example of community members coming together to map out what it is that they'd like to do next. So thinking of all those layers now, this is from 2 ABCD projects in Indonesia. So we had Makassar and Surabaya. And it was with the university, but they were sending like 2,000 students a year out into placement, into villages. And they were like, how can we design something that will be useful for the students and for when people are out in the field? So I offered them, which framework seems right for you? And it was after like 3 days of ABCD training. They'd already been using it for quite some time, so they kind of knew. So all these sticky notes are all of the ABCD tools. So once we had all of these tools, and the participatory one, because there's open space there, Makassar chose the divergent, emergent, convergent. We had all the tools up on sticky notes up here, and because we'd already done the training and had discussion about design and what they were going to do when they went out with the students into the villages, then I stood back and I said, now grab all the tools, put them where they fit. Which tools are good for diverging, which ones are good in the emergent space, which ones for converging. And then Surabaya chose Theory U, so did the same thing. So it ended up kind of turning into a bingo game during the training, because I said to them, every time you hear of a tool that you think you could use, write it up on a sticky note and put it up on the wall. So yeah, I had people in Makassar, I can't remember what bingo was in Makassar, but they were jumping up and running like to get the tool up before their friend did, and so they were actually being involved in helping to create what was going to happen. So then when they went into Theory U, they were able to say, this is when we'll do which process, right? And they put their names on it as well. So I asked them to step up to practice. This is where then I shadow facilitated. So it was funny actually, the first village or community gathering that we did, And I was sitting over in the corner, and these were big, that's like 2 or 3 sheets of paper. So I was sitting over in the corner there with it here, really just timekeeping. And they were all doing it themselves in Bahasa, which was great because they didn't have to translate what I was saying and slow down the process either. So they were hosting it all. And it was in the first break that one of the guys came up to me and he said, after the break, we just want to introduce you. And I said, oh, yeah, I hadn't even thought of that, actually. And he said, yeah, one of the community members said, who's the white lady in the corner? And for me also, though, that was like, yes, you know, it's working. Because I was out of the picture, you know, but I was able to be there and still support them to do that. So that went fabulously. So this is what I do now. This is what I continue to do. So I get, people will make a call. They'll say, we want to host one of these in our community. So we'll come in and do a 3-day training on how to do this, and then I step back. Then the thing I have to remember is follow up. Go back sometime and say, what happened? I'm not really good at that. Quite often I'll get tagged on Facebook and that kind of thing. So, yeah, these ladies in Makassar, I was there in 2015. When I went back in 16, this is what they'd done, using ABCD and going into community with design. So it was fabulous. This was out of an open space conversation, and they were saying, we want to explore what we have in our community that we could tap into. Like, what are the resources that we have there? And it was quite a poor community, and they felt they had nothing. So when they had a look around, there was carrot and cabbage factories. And one of them jokingly said, well, one thing we've got a lot of is carrot and carriage scraps all up and down the side of the road. And they went, well, how can we use that? So 12 months later, I go back, they've started up their own social enterprise in Pokja 5, which is a village, and they've made them into crisps, like chips. So you can get, and they're all flavoured, they're awesome. So you've got the cabbage and the carrot crisps, and it's now turned into an economic asset because now this village is creating an income from their scraps. So they say waste is just a resource in the wrong place. It was fabulous. Oh, I'm done. 2.5 minutes to go. That's cool.